I'm going to talk just a little bit about the future of the DAO economy. So blockchain 2.0, what we're seeing here. So what we're trying to get to, right? So what we're arriving at is the internet of value. So if there's any value anywhere, it should be able to be traded on a blockchain, right? So we're moving from the first distributed ledger or a decentralized ledger on Bitcoin. We moved to a smart contract ledger so we can have logic on there. And now we're moving to Web 3.0 or the next web, which is essentially blockchains where, so you're, who here sort of recognizes 3 of those logos, just to get an idea? Okay. 5. Okay, all right. So, so what we've got, let's see, I don't know, we've got maybe Ethereum, Monero, Dash. Who here recognizes this little one here called Startcoin? Okay, so we've got maybe 50 currencies that people recognize, and then we've got about 950 that you don't recognize, right? So essentially what the internet of value is creating a system where any value can be atomically swapped between any other value. So there's no need to go to a centralized ledger. You can atomically swap on-chain through a smart contract. You can lock one value, and your bid ask, your marketplace is instantly transferable. So these tokens all sit isolated, right? So who here's got Dogecoin? Right, is anyone doing anything with their Dogecoin other than hodling it, right? So each one of these has got an interesting stack. You know, Namecoin there does DNS naming. It's an alternative naming service. You have Startcoin there if you want to run a crowdfunding activist campaign. But none of these actually talk to each other, right? So they're all isolated. So this is kind of the first iteration of the ecosystem. Much like bulletin boards. So you had a dial-up modem, you dialed in, and it's an individual bulletin board. But none of these actually have any relationship. So you cannot really take and say, right, I want a name service, I want my token, maybe I want some privacy on that, run it through Dash, and then run it through Ethereum as a smart contract. These are isolated chains. So largely because we never had the technology stack, we needed to actually get the foundation layers built. So much like you had websites before you moved to static websites, then you moved to Facebook, Google, then you moved to the cloud. There's no interoperability, right? So the vision is now that with decentralized exchanges, the first vision was to test it out and trial it on Ether Delta. So now we have an atomic swap. You can have a whole range of tokens that talk to each other without the need for a central party, right? So they can all exchange on a centralized exchange. That defeats the object, right? So having a centralized exchange, you're pretty much going back to the original model. So much of the discussion around KYC, AML, blacklisted coins, whitelisted, the problem lies in reducing the fungibility, right? So if you reduce the fungibility, you won't get an internet of value. So anyone who sort of doubts that there will be an internet of value, there'll be a 3.0, what you have to look at is who here is familiar with Minitel? Right, so Minitel was the original internet system built in France, but it kept it as an isolated case, and from the show of hands, nobody actually remembers Minitel and the first French internet because the hypernet and the internet took hold, right? So you had the Janet, you had ARPANET, and then you had a whole internet. So any token that isn't decentralized truly hasn't got an interoperability or cannot be put in atomic is looking to be isolated. So if you're going to do due diligence on a token, on a coin, have a look at where its stack is. Is there a vision to put it on the internet of value? Right, so who here has invested in any ICOs? Right. Okay. So great news, right? A year ago, I'd ask this question, and there'd be like maybe one, three hands, maybe two, and you're all likely to invest in it. So how do you do your due diligence on it? And one of the things I would look is there a vision from that team to have that token move towards a decentralized exchange, and that essentially answers the question whether it'll have any value on the Internet of Tokens. So why do we need an Internet of Value, right? What's the reason behind it? The essential reason we need it is we move into an autonomous society, right? So you have autonomous cars, you have autonomous drones, you have an entire culture of autonomous systems being developed, right? So if you look at Apple's, it has an entire division on autonomous systems, right? Because they see the future is driving towards some level of autonomy and automation in the entire sort of supply chain, as well as the output, right? So we may see some friction in the launch of autonomous cars, etc. But where this really gets interesting is each of these autonomous organisms require some form of value transfer, right? So if you currently want your autonomous car, we just launched in Dubai, we're just launching a trial called eCharge, where we'll have a token for your autonomous car. That token will allow you to go and charge up, and eventually that token will also become a way for you to actually pay for insurance, pay for toll charge. If we were to run this on an existing stack, or without a decentralized Internet of Value, where you can actually swap these autonomous tokens, your car will have friction, right? So the idea of an autonomous car is not to have an operator there that says, oh, I'm going to a toll charge, let me pay that. Oh, I need to charge up, let me pay for the electricity to charge up. The idea is to have a system where you can have a completely seamless interaction. So whichever token it is, that vehicle can acquire and translate. And if it's only holding one type of token, it can atomically swap that token for another type of token. So if you look at the vacuum, whatever you look at, eventually we'll just trialing with systems where your actual warranty can be bought and traded with a token, right? So if it breaks down and it needs to call somebody, you don't have to have that interaction, right? It just goes on, it goes to DEX, says, okay, I've got X number of tokens, let me swap these tokens, call somebody in to guarantee and replace that vacuum. So we're all familiar with drones. So drones need to be maintained, they need to be operated on, there needs to be what we're starting to see is Stanford, if you have a look, it's got a swarm drone project. The need for a drone to actually return to base kind of defeats the object, right? So if you look at Uber, the advantage of Uber is, why was it a killer app, right? The killer app is a traditional taxi model was, take a taxi, it will go out, take the passenger, the taxi will return to base, it's called an RTB call, return to base, get a call, find another passenger, right? Uber came along and said, okay, wherever you go, the next port of call will come on your app and you'll fire off. So with drones, we need a similar type of architecture. Your drone can drop one package off at point A, and then it can get another delivery job, right? So in order to do that, you need some form of charge, you need some sort of interoperability, and it can be paid. So it can be a token on your drone that can pay and say, okay, I've paid, go and pick from X, drop to Y. For this to be on a centralized non-Internet of Value means that each drone will have to have its own token architecture. We start to get into a lot more friction. But if you have a drone that can autonomously swap in and out other tokens, get rewarded, you're starting to look at a much more liquid drone market. So DLT presents new design considerations for IoT topologies, right? It's quite a wordful. so IoT devices, right? So traditional market says, okay, you're going to develop an IoT, company X is going to develop a sensor, company Y is going to develop a sensor, company, so you have a whole host of companies developing their sensors. And then you have a supply chain which says, okay, this is going to be bought by a company or an individual who's going to plug this sensor in. There's a lot of friction in that model. What we're playing about on the Internet of Value is where the sensor itself can be paid for. So the sensor itself can acquire its own life cycle. So the example we played for is environmental sensors. So you suffer from hay fever, you want to take some pollen data, depending on where you arrive, you would essentially be able to access with your wallet, take your internet wallet, whatever you coin you happen to have, whatever value, it will swap for that sensor, whether you're in Dubai, whether you're in Kiev, wherever you are. You take a swap for that sensor, it would pay for that tiny bit of data, and then that sensor in itself can have its own sustainable life cycle. A, it makes the sensor profitable, and B, the sensor can start to acquire. So because it's atomic value, it can say, okay, 20% of that will go to the electricity. So it will swap it out for a token to purchase the electricity. 20% of it will go into a fund to replace the sensor. And then maybe a percentage goes to the actual person who's deployed the sensor or organization that's pushed out the sensor. So eventually you can start to see IoT get a life cycle of its own. You can have millions of devices which have their own architecture embedded in there. So they pay for each other via having sensors. So the idea is these become self-sustaining devices. There's no need for these devices to essentially even have an owner, right? So we can start to put them on DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and they can start to have a life of their own because they're replacing themselves. They're selling their data, and then some form of what we imagine is going to be a decentralized autonomous organism as a new type of meta layer. Okay. I mean, ideally, how would this function, right? What you'd essentially start to see is what we call DAO chains arrive, right? There'd be a decentralized autonomous chains which sit and which talk. So one of the models we're playing around with is having a token for this Internet of Value, not as a traditional Bitcoin or type of token. This would be much more like Ethereum. It'd be like gas, right? So you'd have gas on your DAO token, which then allows for the friction. If there's any friction between moving from one token to another, you can use this as a type of stable gas token to move across value. A DAO chain would essentially be autonomous. It would have a brain of its own, and you could just have any of this Internet of Value reside on the chain itself, right? And in terms of the wallet, so currently you have a wallet. It's much like traditional wallets. You pull it out and you make a payment. You have a Bitcoin wallet or an Ethereum wallet. A DAO wallet would be much more. So a DAO wallet would essentially be autonomous cash, right? Autonomous. So it would have its own brain. It would say, right, you're in location X, you're doing Y. This is the best token at this current time to be spent, right? This is the best swap to be. So you can have programmable value on your DAO wallet that would push and pull and say, right, so if I'm arriving at a toll booth, the DAO wallet say the most appropriate token now is the toll booth token, right? If I'm taking a journey, the most appropriate token now would be to book with my Air Miles token and then swap back out from that Air Miles token, right? And that would be completely autonomous. So there'd be no need for you to have to interact with it. It would have its own programming logic. It would be autonomous in a sense that there is no need for that DAO token to ask the user, should I spend X, should I spend Y, right? So with a Internet of Value and DAOs, we can start to move to autonomous cash, right? So the wallets you have now, however great they look, will look very much redundant because you're still, you have a wallet. I don't know, how many of you are familiar with a Jax wallet? Right, so you have these multi-currency wallets, right? So you have 20, 30 currencies on there. But every time you need to spend or push or pull that payment, you're still having to go to that wallet, decide what is the most appropriate coin, how to spend it, when to spend it. Right, we can take all of that heavy lifting away. One of the models we're playing for is DAO code would be essentially allowing you to program that logic in, and then if we looked at the entire world, everyone can be a contractor to it, right? So you would contract into a DAO what you offer, what service you offer, and then it would, as an Internet of Value, it would start to push and say, okay, contractor A, contractor B, C. Some of the experiments have started to show that you can start to create new value chains amongst contractors autonomously, right? So you can say, okay, we're actually learning from previous examples, the token from the building contractor. We can do just in time. We can say, right, let's purchase with Brickcoin for the bricks. But actually, if we were to wait 36 hours or build it in another format, we could actually swap the value without having to. So currently you have contractors and they're isolated, right? So each contractor bids for a model, does a contract, bids out again, right? There's no DAO in the middle which decides what having the data of all contracts at all times, right? I've got 2 minutes, so I'm going to pretty much rush through it. Contractors, DAOs and products, right? Currently, someone builds the product, someone orders it. So you're going to start to see eventually the product lifecycle and contractors much more closely aligned, right? So each product and service is offered to the DAO, and each contractor receives back from the DAO, right? Why is this allowed to happen, right? Because there's a need, right? We've passed the open source revolution. We now can build groups, scale with groups. This level of anonymity allows for extreme levels of fungibility, right? So it takes away all the friction you would require if you had to do KYC, AML on each transaction. There's a heavy load on that message packet, but if it's a completely fungible token and it doesn't have any weight on the packet, you can start to see a much larger scaling. So we can start. We've got a couple of projects, Enucum, and we're starting to look at sharding, with each shard running 1 million transactions. So this does scale to the needs of the current society, but we expect trillions of transactions from IoT devices, right? There's the DAO network will have a multiple number of DAOs, right? So there'll be a DAO for ICOs. So if you looked at Vitalik and you currently have the DAOCO model, right? There'll be DAOs, universities, currently very old architecture, when I credit, what have you. Even take a lounge, take a members club, right? You pay, you subscribe, you take a value, and you take a service from it. What you eventually see is a number of DAO networks emerge, where you can actually start to enable. I've been told timeout. So, just finally, what's the role for humans, right? Once DAOs happen, but a DAO works amazingly for the logic you program and what you do, but then it needs an oracle call, right? And what we're starting to see is this need that a DAO already has pre-programmed. If 7 of 12 or 6 of 9, so it sends it out, it does an oracle call. If 6 of 9 agree on the governance structure, then that whatever needs to be executed or questioned will be questioned, right? Where it really gets interesting is the models we're playing around where DAOs learn from each other. So you start to have a real AI deep learning network. I'll rush through that. Adopting utility from ICOs, you can start to program that into DAOs. Supporting new tokens, research and analysis. DAO Lounge. We're very likely to see this as an emergence of a completely new type of culture. I think I'm out of time, so I'm not able to take any questions, but welcome to the future, right? It's actually working, it's developing, it exists in the lab. These ICO projects you see, they're somewhat isolated. If you want to see where they fit in, they're going to start to fit into a much bigger whole. So these are sort of the starting blocks in the internet.